Hello and welcome to the first KDL What We're Learning program for adults of the summer. My name is Amy. I'm a librarian at the Kentwood branch. Today our program is Invasive Species and Native Plants with the Kent Conservation District. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that our Summer Wonder has started. You can pick up your Summer Wonder guide at any branch or go to kdl.org to log your summer reading on the Beanstack website. As a side note, since this is a nature-themed program today, KDL has also partnered with the Kent County Parks for a summer-long outdoor scavenger hunt for kids. If you find our Summer Wonder mascot, Curie, at any of the 5 Kent County parks, you have a chance to win a fun prize. Now for today's program, we have with us Skylar Fish of the Kent Conservation District, who's here to answer any questions. Hello, Skylar.
Hello.
All right, today's program includes pre-recording, and we will have time for live questions after the fact. So please type in your questions in the comment section of YouTube or Facebook, and we'll get to those after the recording. So thank you for tuning in, and let's get started.
Welcome to the Native Plants, Invasive Plants in Your Garden presentation. This is a pre-recorded presentation by Kent Conservation District. My name is Skylar Fish and I will be your presenter. I am the Conservation Coordinator at Kent Conservation District and I've been with the district since 2019. I graduated from Calvin College with a degree in biology focusing on plants and ecology, and while I was at college I worked with Plaster Creek Stewards and Calvin's Ecosystem Preserve, working with native plants and green infrastructure. Before we continue with the main portion of this presentation, I want to introduce conservation districts to you. Michigan conservation districts are non-regulatory local units of government that currently receive no state funding and are run by grants, donations, fundraisers like our native plant sale, as well as local support. The goal of conservation districts is to provide assistance to landowners in the area in order to protect the health and environmental quality of the land. We work with both farmers and private landowners to increase the environmental quality of their properties. The Kent Conservation District is part of the West Michigan Conservation Network. The West Michigan Conservation Network is a CISMA, or Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area, consisting of 7 counties, conservation districts, parks departments, municipalities, nature preserves, and most importantly, volunteers. Working as a CISMA allows us to work together to cast a wide net against invasives. We share grants, organize volunteers, share workforces, combine outreach, and create a regional effort against invasive species. So as we move into this presentation, I want to introduce the definition of what an invasive species is. The state defines an invasive species as one that is non-native whose introduction causes harm or is likely to cause harm to Michigan's economy, environment, or human health. It's important to remember that it needs to cause harm, as there are some non-natives that don't cause harm, such as a honeybee, where there are some non-natives that do cause harm, and that's what we're talking about when we're talking about invasive species. Beyond that definition, we like to think of invasive plants as a biological pollutant. So if you were to see oil or trash strewn throughout a forest, it would be an obvious problem. And we think the same thing about invasives, like you can see here in that picture of the garlic mustard. One thing that they have over traditional pollution is that they grow, adapt, proliferate, and spread, which means that the problem actually continues to get worse. If left. If you were to leave a pile of trash in the woods, it would stay there, it's bad, but it would not continually grow and spread. In order to successfully combat invasives, we need to figure out how they get here. A lot of them come in on industry like contaminated crops or ballast water. Some of them are planted as ornamentals or as wildlife, habitat, or erosion control, and others are transported by people, such as a spotted lanternfly, which is transported on landscaping supplies, or the emerald ash borer, which can be transported with firewood. We do find that 85% of woody invasives come from the ornamental plant industry, and that's really what we're going to focus on today. The first invasive I want to talk about is Japanese knotweed. Japanese knotweed is a great example of an ornamental plant that ended up causing a lot more harm than good. So Japanese knotweed is native to the volcanic regions of Japan. It grows on kind of barren, rocky soils. It's a hardy plant with a nice bloom, good structure. It grows pretty big, so it's kind of like an herbaceous shrub. It's sterile, so it doesn't produce seeds in most cases. And it was brought over as an ornamental, first to England and then to the United States. So with that being said, why should we worry about Japanese knotweed? Japanese knotweed is a prohibited plant in the state of Michigan, which means it is unlawful to buy, sell, or otherwise possess the plant material. And we treat it under the MISGP grant. It's a hardy plant that spreads mostly by human interaction, such as mowing, cutting, and digging. The pieces of the plant can be dragged around by the lawnmowers and spread to new areas. It can be transported with soil, and it even can catch on like car windows and be transported from one place to another. This plant poses a significant threat to infrastructures. It can grow through asphalt, as shown in the pictures above, as well as siding, and even cause problems with foundations. If left untreated, it can grow and overtake natural areas, yards, fields, and even homes. Another plant we are concerned about is Japanese barberry. This is a plant that is frequently found in landscaping, and you'll see it probably either at your house or your neighbor's house. It can be found either red or green, and it has little red berries as well as thorns on the branches. One of the biggest reasons that we're concerned about this species is it's linked to ticks and Lyme disease. This plant promotes the number of ticks in an area, which then promotes the amount of possible Lyme disease in an area, which is definitely a risk to human health. The other reason we're concerned about this is it takes over understories. So this plant will, escape the garden and then it will take over understories, which limits forest diversity, especially understory diversity, but it also limits forest regeneration. As the old trees get old and die, they'll fall down, and with the barberry, new trees aren't able to sprout and take their place, which means that over time you will lose the forest. Continuing on the topic of forest loss, we come to Oriental bittersweet. This is a non-native plant that will grow and girdle trees, causing an environmental damage, but it also causes damage in that it can decrease property values, as trees are shown to be beneficial towards property values. Beyond this, it can escape to natural areas. So if you have a little bit, and this is the same with barberry, if you have a little bit in your yard, it might not be the biggest problem to you, but the berries can get transported by birds to natural areas, which means those nice parks that you like to walk in, or even like national forests, can get these, and then they can go unchecked for a while, and then you lose lots and lots of trees, you lose this nice natural area, and that's definitely a big concern. Another group of plants that we're worried about is black and pale swallowwort. In Kent County, we mostly have black swallowwort. This is a plant that poses several impairments to Michigan and its lands. The first being it's toxic to livestock. So grazing animals and in pastures, it can really become a problem. It grows in a variety of habitats. So it will grow kind of dark and green in shade or in sun. Can grow near water or upland, so it definitely can take over large areas, and this will coat the ground much like the bittersweet. It also has negative impacts towards butterflies. They tend to think it's a milkweed and lay their eggs on it, and the eggs hatch. The caterpillars cannot eat this plant, so that definitely could pose a threat as this becomes more and more prevalent. This is one that is pretty new to the Kent County, and we only have it in a few spots, so it's good, but it is one that's hard to treat since one that's hard to remove, so it's definitely one that we're concerned about. Garlic mustard is another plant, and you might actually know of this one. This one is a pretty common spring weed. A lot of people work on taking it out, but it just seems to come back every year. This plant produces quite a few seeds, and it will actually form really thick monocultures on the forest floor, outcompeting through allelopathic chemicals a lot of the natural understory plants, especially spring ephemerals. This plant is tough because the seeds are viable for years, so a lot of people pull it year after year after year after year, and there's a couple things to know about it that make it a lot easier to treat. The first is that it is a biennial, which means that it sprouts from its seed and it produces no flowers the first year, just short leaves. A lot of people miss this and they think that they've pulled all the tall ones because the second year they get tall, it gets flowers, it gets seeds, so if you pull all those, you're like, oh, I got it all. But the first year plants are left behind, which means that next year you'll have the same problem. To treat it, you try to get both the first and second year plants. The first year that you try to pull them, and then after that, just try to pull the first year plants because you shouldn't have any second year plants still around. That doesn't always happen to be the case, but that's definitely the easiest way to treat it. Since the seeds are viable for years, it does take a while to eradicate from an area. So this is a list of some other common garden plants that are invasive. The first three, bishop's goutweed, yellow archangel, and myrtle or periwinkle, are common ground cover plants that are used in more shady areas. These plants all are just creeping vines that grow slowly. The problem is once they get out into woodlands, they just continue throughout the whole woodlands, taking out a lot of those nice understory plants and competing for space. These are all kind of problematic. They are difficult to get out of an area once established, and we really discourage anybody planting them. Silvergrass is one that's used commonly in landscaping features. It is becoming more of a problem. We're starting to notice it in a lot of natural areas, and it's just kind of taken over. The seeds are very easily wind dispersed, which means it can spread pretty far, and we want to make sure that we're not using those and would rather use some native grasses. Dame's rocket is one that a lot of times people see in their woods or along roadsides, and I think it's really pretty. It's got pink, white, or purple flowers. It looks somewhat like phlox, which is, we have native phlox, but the Dame's rocket acts more like garlic mustard. And then water hyacinth is another one that's used sometimes in aquatic features. The biggest concern is what you're doing with this plant when you're getting rid of it. You might throw it into a river, or if it can escape some other way, and then it can cause problems in wetlands and lakes and rivers where it will overtake the surface and really compete with the native lily pads and other native aquatic plants. So now that you know a little bit, what can you do? Well, continuing to learn. Learning is always the first step. You need to know what you're dealing with, know what to do with it before you can do anything. So that's definitely something that just continuing learning, looking at more presentations and stuff is always helpful. Then prevention. Prevention is a really key step. If they're not there in the first place, then they're not a problem. So when you're out buying stuff from the store, make sure you look at what it is and how it will interact with your natural areas and your garden and your yard in general. A lot of these plants come through the ornamental trade, which means that a lot of them could have been stopped by just not planting them in the first place. Getting involved is definitely one of the biggest things you can do. Not only are you helping these organizations out, who are usually a handful of people who cannot manage the areas that they're managing by themselves, but you're also learning. You're learning how to identify these plants, you're learning how to remove these plants, and you're really learning what they do and why they're bad. You can then take a lot of this knowledge and help people out, like family and friends, learn what they can do in their yards, and that's the only way that large scale we can combat these plants. Reporting is very important. I'll go over some of how to report, but it allows organizations like the Kent Conservation District track where these plants are, and then obviously removing the plants correctly is going to help reduce their presence. So a great resource for this is MISIN, which is the Midwest Invasive Species Information Network. You can learn, explore, and report lots of different invasives here. They have like little articles about something like on this one, it's the spotted lanternfly, which is a pretty bad invasive, especially for our fruit trees. But this is where you can come in. They have training modules, which teach you how to identify the plant. They have just information on different species, but this is where they keep a lot of the reporting data. So there's an app that you can download on a phone, or you can go online and you can report these species, and this just allows us to look at the maps and see where they are. These maps are also available for you to look at if you want to see where some invasives are in the area. So beyond those steps, one of the biggest things you can do to prevent invasives is to use native plants. So we'll kind of transition into that part of the presentation. I will say some of the pictures will have species names, and these are of the native plants. If it's not native, I'm going to label it as invasive. So what are Michigan native plants? You might think of, like on the picture on the right, kind of just a field of wildflowers or something like that, or just, natural wooded areas. But you can go further with them. We have a lot of nice native plants that look, more like the picture on the right. Those are all natives, and they can look really nice in a garden setting. So just as I took a moment to talk about the definition of invasive species, I want to take a moment to talk about how we might define a native species. And there's different schools of thought. There's definitely like historical native, local native, like to your county or state, and then even like regionally or genetically native to the region, like the Midwest, or just like a certain population. But I think it's easy to just kind of take a step back and identify it more simply as plants that occur like locally in your region. So this would be like county or state, as well as taking into consideration what kind of environment you're in. A great resource for this is Michigan Flora. Michigan Flora will show you where this is located in the state of Michigan, like what counties, and then also what kind of habitats it's naturally found in. And this can make it easier to kind of decide what you're looking for and how strict you want to be with the plants. Like if you want a plant that's like one county over, is that really as big of a problem as something that, is not from even this country or this continent? So why use native plants? There's a lot of reasons. But one of them is they're not likely to be invasive if they escape your garden because they already exist outside of your garden. Biodiversity is important, offset habitat loss, wildlife benefits, drought resistance, and stormwater management. So this is an example of why we should use native plants over invasive plants in our landscaping, because they can cause problems when they do produce viable seeds and enter the natural areas. Bradford pear is a flowering tree species that flowers early in the spring, and it produces seeds that were thought to be infertile. However, when two different varieties of the Bradford pear interact, they produce viable seeds that then can be carried by birds into natural areas. And we're starting to see this one really take over fields and forest edges and cause some problems there. Whereas the native eastern redbud or flowering dogwood, the flowering dogwood is not pictured above, but the eastern redbud is, can be used similarly in landscapes along parking lots and sidewalks, along buildings. They're really nice. They're also spring flowering, and if they do produce viable seeds, and if those seeds were to get taken into a natural area, it's fine because that plant is already established in those natural areas, and it doesn't cause a known problem. It doesn't outcompete other native plants. It's kind of part of the ecosystem and increases the diversity. Another important reason to use natives is to increase biodiversity and offset habitat loss. So urban areas are expanding, and they're expanding rapidly, which means that we're losing lots of natural areas, we're losing a lot of natural biodiversity and habitats. One thing that you can do with native plants is create habitats in your yard or even in your garden that continues to hold this biodiversity that's from the area, and really, while it won't completely offset the loss of the natural area, it does lessen the blow. So I think that it's important to think about that, that if you do like these natural areas, it's important to do your part and have a little bit in your own yard. Using native plants is a good practice to help out pollinators and wildlife. Birds, bees, and butterflies use them as a food source, and as we have habitat loss, the food sources diminish. using native plants is a good way to keep those food sources available for these species. Um, at the top here, we have a hawk moth on common milkweed, a bumblebee on wild senna, a bumblebee at our pollinator garden at the district, and we have an emerald sweat bee on coreopsis, a honeybee on goldenrod, and a bumblebee on purple prairie clover. These native plants really provide good food for these insects. Native plants can also provide us with a unique opportunity when it comes to stormwater management. As part of the adaptation for drought resistance, many native plants have deep roots. These deep roots can help break up the soils and create uncompacted soils that water can percolate through. Um, and they can also store water inside their cells as well as evapotranspire water into the atmosphere. With urbanization, much of the landscape is becoming impervious, which means green infrastructure is becoming very important. Green infrastructure allows us to capture some of that stormwater, put it into the groundwater, or evaporate it instead of sending it to our stormwater systems, which are being overly taxed by the increasing pervious surfaces. Beyond the reasons of why you should use them, it's nice to know how they'll benefit you. So as a gardener, what do you get out of these plants? Again, pictured here are purple coneflower, blue lobelia, desmodium, and liatris. One of the big benefits to homeowners is that these plants are low maintenance. A lot of times you'll have like annual beds that are very high maintenance. You have to be out there every spring and picking them up and stuff. But these native plants are perennial, which means that they'll be there. But they also are fairly drought resistant due to the deep roots and adaptation to this climate. You don't have to water them as much. One thing to remember is it's low maintenance, not no maintenance. You need to rake the leaves out of them. You need to remulch if you're going to have a mulched bed. Otherwise, they will start to kind of look more wild. Native plants are often more pest resistant. Now, when it comes to deer will pretty much eat anything if they're hungry enough. So pest resistant, they're not pest proof, but they do provide better pest resistance than other plants. Another thing that can be a benefit is you don't have to go with a completely different look. Some people think of native plants as wild and unruly, but a lot of them look very similar and behave well in gardens to non-native plants. For instance, you have up at the top New Jersey tea, which is actually used in landscaping sometimes. Michigan lily, which is a lily flower that's a nodding lily that's pretty nice. And purple coneflower, which again is used commonly in landscapes. Again, here are some more plants that are familiar looking. You have up the top there's the swamp hibiscus, which is just a hibiscus. It does well in garden soils. You have monarda, or bee balm, or bergamot, and many different names it's called. And then you have cardinal flower there, and then wild petunia, which is our Michigan native petunia. That's a young one, but they do flower almost all summer long, and it's really, really nice plant. And then color. Color is a really, unique thing with the native plants. I think you can get lots of different colors from, other plants, but there is a very wide range of color that you can get out of native plants, and very vibrant colors. So at the top there you have spiderwort with a nice purple, then purple coneflower again next to it, the swamp milkweed with a pink, butterfly weed with the bright orange there, cardinal flower with the really, really vibrant red, and then bottled gentian down there with that blue. And that one's actually interesting because it has an interesting relationship with honeybees. Those bumblebees, those flowers don't open. They stay closed until the bumblebee comes and chews them open and climbs inside. It pries them open and climbs inside. So that's what the flower looks like all summer, but the bumblebees will chew them open. They have a really nice blue. And then you get the really nice purple and orange there of that lead plant, and then below it and next to it are purple prairie clover and Missouri ironweed with those nice pinkish purples. And then the blue lobelia at the end there with the nice blue. And they can have a variety of colors with that blue lobelia. Sometimes you get a paler, sometimes you get more of a purple, but it's a really nice, pretty plant. Something that people might not always think about is Michigan heritage with these plants. If we don't lose these plants, we could lose them. Um, and so it's important to keep them in our gardens and kind of showcase what we have here. You know, looking into our natural areas to bring into gardens, and I mean, we have like the trilliums shown here. I mean, that's a beautiful flower that lots of people really like, and you know, it's one that it's ours. It's native here. And next to it are the foam flowers, which again is a really pretty native plant. So it's important to use our native plants and showcase them, so that we can kind of show what we do have here, because we have a lot, and not a lot of people think about that. So a lot of people come to us with questions about where should I start. They like natives but don't really know anything about them. They want to get into them, but when they tried it, it got messy or they all died. So I'll kind of go over that. So you can kind of take a couple different approaches. One is to just pick one or two plants that you like, get 3 to 5 of each of them, and then just start small. Just see what happens. See if you do like how they end up turning out. You know, take some time to watch them grow, learn how they're going to stand, learn what their flowers are going to look like, and then, you know, kind of just keep expanding slowly. You can research and educate yourself, you know, spending time on watching presentations like this, learning what different plants look like, working with volunteer groups. That's a great way with the volunteer groups, because again, you get to learn the plants, you get to learn where they live, and you get to learn what they look like. But yeah, the other thing you can do is you can hire a professional. You can consult with like an expert or designer and have them help you with decisions. They might even install and maintain the project for you, depending on what you're looking for. But I think it's important not to overwhelm yourself with what you need to do. So if you want to get into native plants, it's okay, you know, to take the next few years and slowly get into them, and learn what you like and what you don't like about the native plants. We also often get asked, when should I plant? Should I plant now? Should I plant in the summer? My suggestion most of the time is to plant in the fall. Planting in the fall allows you time in the summer to do adequate preparations, you know, get the site ready, figure out what you're looking at in terms of lighting, figure out what you're looking at in terms of soil, and then it really allows them to promote good root growth in the fall. They really start putting their roots down, and that's what you want. You want them to grow nice, strong roots because it makes the plant much hardier, in general. This also in the fall requires less water overall, because if you plant in the spring, you're just about to go into a summer, which is hot and dry, and you have to water them. Whereas in the fall, you're going into the winter, which the grounds are going to stay moist. The snow is going to keep them nice and moist in the springtime, and then they'll have those deep roots already established to help with that drought resistant right off the bat. They'll look really nice sooner, I think, in less seasons. Spring is an okay time to plant. It feels like the right time to plant. You know, everything's greening up. You get that energy to go out and do it. So it's not the worst thing to go out. You do see more immediate results. You see the tops growing all summer long, and that's nice. But you need to make sure that plants are taken care of. You need to make sure that you're watering them. You need to make sure that you're, you know, watching to make sure they're not getting pulled up or all this stuff. But yeah, so my suggestion is to plant in the fall, but you can also plant in the spring. So there are some things to remember when going into native plants, because you don't want to start and not like what happens because you're expecting something different. Native plants take time to mature, so they take about 2 to 3 years to get to their full mature size. And that can be a little frustrating for people who don't know that that's coming. Native plants are usually sold pretty young because they do have those deep roots. It's harder to keep them alive in pots for longer, and so they're sold pretty young. And so they do have to take some time to mature. Another thing is sun and soil conditions are important. This is for any plant. You need to kind of know what can go where. So I have 2 pictures here. One is the iris, and the other one is the nodding wild onion on the left. And these plants have very different conditions. The nodding wild onion likes it in, you know, partial shade to full sun, and it likes it pretty dry, and it can do well in sandy soils, whereas the iris there wants it to be wet. It's fine with full sun to partial shade, but it wants it to be wet. You can put it at downspouts and stuff like that, but if you were to swap their locations, neither of them would do well. And that's something to keep in mind. There's a lot of difference in native plants. If you don't like native plants because you had one plant you didn't like one time, then maybe you just didn't like that plant. You don't like all the traditional garden plants either. So, if you find one that you don't like, there are lots of others that act, in all types of different ways. So it's important to remember that if you don't like one, it's not you don't like native plants, you didn't like that plant. To learn more or find volunteer opportunities, you can go to the River City Wild Ones website, Kent Conservation, or the West Michigan Conservation Network. There are volunteer opportunities, informational sessions, and service learning days. Finding and sourcing native plants can be difficult. There are a few organizations, including the Kent Conservation District, who do them kind of as a fundraising sale. So we have a sale in the spring and the fall for wildflowers and trees. Wild Ones has a sale down at the Farmers Market in July. You can see their website for details on that. And then Kelvin Ecosystem Preserve also has a spring sale. As well as having the spring sale, Kelvin Ecosystem Preserve has a native gardens that is open to the public. It was by their parking lot and their bunker interpretive center, and it's a really nice place to go and look at native plants. Their goal there was to kind of create a garden where people could come and see what the plants could look like in a garden setting. So if you want to head over there and check some of those out, it's a good way to tell what you might like, what you might not like. The Native Plant Guild is another great resource for landowners. It's a group of businesses that work with native plants and promote native plants in Michigan. This is definitely more of a resource that if you're looking for professional help getting these, plants installed, this would be people who do whole landscaping projects, whole gardens areas, and they have a lot of experience working throughout Michigan. There's also resources here if you want to do larger scale restoration, like, forest restoration or savanna restoration, and other types of restoration work. If you are looking to do your own planting and you are looking for larger amounts of plants, the plant production here, you can get larger amounts of plants. If you're looking for more help regarding invasive plants, the Kent Conservation District has a Landowner Toolkit workshop on July 17th from 9 to noon. We also have other events throughout the summer. Those will be posted on our calendar, which is on our website. We do for-hire work, and you can contact us for inquiries about for-hire work with bittersweet and barberry, as well as garlic mustard. And we do MISGP subsidized treatments for specific species like Japanese knotweed. If you're looking for more information than what we have, the West Michigan Conservation Network has a calendar on their website that has service learning days, other informational sessions such as this one, and just in general, more information on stuff outside of Kent County as well. And finally, I'd like to thank you for joining us on this presentation.
All right, thank you, Skylar, for that informative presentation. Now, if the viewers have any questions, please put them in the comments and then we'll try to get to them. A question from me out of curiosity, what do you do with the invasive plants after you remove them? How do you dispose of them?
So it depends on the plant. Most of them, if we do like a chemical treatment, then generally that has killed the parts of the plant and we'll leave them there to decompose naturally. Especially with like Oriental bittersweet, the stems won't cause more Oriental bittersweet, so we will chop them up and kind of leave them in wood areas. With something like Japanese knotweed, if you cut it down, we don't want you to move it because it can spread more plant material. And then the garlic mustard, there are a few resources. So with garlic mustard, you do bag it, you pull it and you bag it, and then you can look up where garlic mustard drop-off sites might be. I know that Cascade has one there. So.
Cool. Interesting. Looks like we have a question. Are monoculture green lawns considered harmful or invasive in a technical way or in any other way?
So I think a lot of people who are like pro native plants might jump on, the grass lawn as not a good thing. And I would say that in a lot of ways, it's not much different than a patio or a, driveway. Um, that has very shallow roots. Water doesn't really go through it. It doesn't absorb that much water. And we do have to water them to keep them green, put chemicals on them to keep them green, and keep them nice and healthy. So in those ways, it's bad. But there are some benefits to having at least some, manicured green space, and that you can go outside, you can have a space where you go sit down. Ideally, you'd be completely surrounded with native plants, but it just gives you a place to go outside, because being outside is a good thing, and being around native plants is a good thing. We don't just want you to have a big garden and not have anywhere to enjoy it from. So
Makes sense. All right. What are some good native plants that help attract birds and butterflies? And what's your favorite plant?
So yeah, I think I went over some of that in the video, but specifically for birds, like the purple coneflower, there's Rudbeckia fulgida, which is like a black-eyed Susan, or orange coneflower sometimes, and then gray-headed coneflower, the coreopsis, there's gray coreopsis and tall coreopsis. A lot of those plants with a little bit larger seeds, birds really love. I didn't talk about it in the presentation, but little blue stem is actually a really nice source of seeds kind of throughout the fall and into the winter. A lot of times you'll see birds kind of jumping up and grabbing seeds off of it. It's a grass that does well in kind of garden settings. It's pretty short. And then for butterflies, the swamp milkweed, the butterfly weed, those are both good ones. They're related to the common milkweed, but I think they're a little bit prettier for a garden setting. And really the best thing you can do to have lots of butterflies be happy is have lots of native plants, because if you're a butterfly and you're fluttering above and you're just looking down, you might not stop for one plant. You're looking kind of for an area where you can rest for like maybe a week or so and just, go through all the flowers. So just having lots of flowers is just in general good for the butterflies.
Cool. And what's your favorite native plant?
So actually it's kind of weird, but I think it has to do with when you get further into native plants. There's a species of sedge that I really like. It has a pretty cool flower or I guess seed structure, but also it just has a nice structure, which would be like Carex grayi. It's kind of a wetland sedge, but it's kind of an obscure one. There's also Carex musk, which is palm sedge, which is another obscure one, but so those might be a little bit off. But I do like butterfly weed. It's got a really nice bright orange flower that I think pretty much everybody can enjoy. So.
Cool. All right. What is the biggest thing an individual can do to help at a larger level, in addition to what they can do at home?
Yeah. So again, I said it a couple times in the presentation. Volunteering is probably the biggest thing you can do. Going out there. A lot of these organizations that are doing this kind of work don't have the manpower to get it done at the scale that it's getting done. So, you think about how many developments are going up, how many houses are being put in, how many of these nice areas are being kind of turned into more urban or suburban settings, and then how many people are in conservation. So really volunteers are needed to keep that going. And then beyond just volunteering, I think that kind of like, pushing, for if you have like a, garden club or something like that, just kind of, being an advocate for, the native plants, and, making sure to spread information about some of the harmful invasive plants, just so that people know, because a lot of times people agree that they like these things, they just don't know about them, or they dislike them. Like the Oriental bittersweet, we have all the time people are like, it was pretty for a few years, and then it started taking my trees down, and I didn't know what it was, and I tried to take care of it, but I didn't know, and then it got out of hand. We had somebody get told by somebody in their gym that, oh yeah, that sounds like Oriental bittersweet, and then they had us come out, and we've mostly taken care of the problem. So spreading the word and stuff is good. And then also, if you do, I think when you do native plants at your home, if that's kind of what you're doing, make sure that you don't just kind of like throw some seeds out there and make all your neighbors mad. And I think that if you really want this to spread, it's really nice to have an aesthetic appeal to it.
because you can make native plants look nice, and if we just know that and they don't think of native plants as somebody who just let their lawn get long, then that's another thing you could do. So kind of being a good representative of what native plants can be. So.
Makes sense. All right, that's all the questions that are in there at the moment. So if anyone else has questions, they can go ahead and ask them now. Otherwise, we'll just wrap up. So, well, thanks for the presentation today, and thank you to the viewers for watching, listening, and commenting. The KDL's What We're Learning series for adults occurs every other Wednesday at 7 p.m. Next time will be Healthy Living for Your Brain and Body by the Alzheimer's Association of Grand Rapids. So thank you all, and have a good night.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.